the last thing I want to put in is in the book, Jack Morin, he talks about what he calls the erotic equation, which is attraction plus obstacles equals excitement. So I was thinking of a friend of mine who I was talking about who is very attracted to his boss. And he says it's so crazy because I wouldn't be attracted to her if I just met her. But it's because she's his boss. Like here's this obstacle where then he's attracted, right? Because it can't happen. I think it's interesting to think about obstacles. And sometimes I believe that we try to create obstacles in ways that are potentially destructive to us. You know, we like people who are unattainable, or sometimes we get in cycles in our relationships where we create fights. So we break up. So then there's an obstacle that draws us back together again. And we get in these like makeup breakup cycles that can be really painful for us. And it might be because we're trying to create charge. We're trying to create an obstacle to overcome in order to stimulate our arousal. And some of the emotions that he puts in, Jack Morin puts in the book, of signs that that some people think of almost as emotional aphrodisiacs, are things like excitement and satisfaction and closeness, and also things like anger and guilt and anxiety. And neither one of these are good or bad in the face of it. But I think we can sort of feel when something might be more or less beneficial for us in our life. You know, I work with one client who is religious. And so for her, feeling guilt is really exciting because she's allowing herself to violate all the prohibitions that were imposed on her by her religion. So something being naughty is not necessarily wrong if that's what turns you on, right? But maybe feeling like you need the guilt to be aroused might not be something that you want to keep using in the future. And so I was trying to think about what the core of this is, and this is the last thing, which is just I think arousal actually happens at the edge. I think arousal happens when we're on the precipice of revealing a new part of ourselves or experiencing a new part of ourselves, which is why it's easier to have more arousal at the beginning of a relationship or at the beginning of a sexual encounter, because everything is new and everything is first, and because you don't know where it's going to go. It's so vulnerable. You know, I think it's actually the vulnerability that is one of the keys that we might be in a potential for arousal. I'm skipping over a few things, unfortunately, but I mentioned before in the beginning that I think part of the paths that our templates show us is a way through some of the difficult experiences that we've been through. And I think one of the core traumas or difficulties or challenges that we've all been through in terms of our sexuality is the fear of rejection. And so a lot of what our templates show us is one, what it would be like, what validation we want, and then two, who we could be if we really received that validation. A lot of templates will almost have a developmental progress where in the beginning you're completely validated for your social identity and who you are and your abilities and your erotic nature, that that's something attractive and beautiful and desirable and competent. And then once that's validated, the second phase of the template usually includes something transcendent, where you shed your social identity completely and you enter into something that's more just that pure energetic state. And so it's almost like vulnerability is that threshold between where our fear of rejection meets who we want to be, meets who we could be if we were validated. My main point is that there are some ways that we create those obstacles through um, really, really challenging situations for ourselves. And then there are ways that we can create the opportunities for that vulnerability just by bringing in more of ourselves. And there are ways in which we're kind of looking for the other person to validate us, for us to be able to bring ourselves in. And that's why it feels so terrifying and so vulnerable and so risky. And part of the value of becoming aware of our template is also learning how to validate ourselves to be able to bring our own vulnerability in and cross those edges for ourselves and bring in more of our wholeness into our sexual experience. And so the theme, I was so inspired by this when I was researching that our theme for next month is actually going to be erotic vulnerability. And I have sort of a tantric perspective and just a bunch of stuff to bring into it. But but this idea of vulnerability, I think, is useful because it doesn't have to be just in terms of firsts when you're first getting in a relationship, and that it kind of, to me, shows a way where you can sort of keep crossing your edges and keep bringing in your vulnerable parts, even when you're in a long-term relationship. And that it's also empowering because it's something that can originate with you, and you're not sort of giving it to someone else to either reject or validate your sexuality. So if you put your email in the chat box, I'm going to be sending out the announcement for when that next meeting happens on erotic vulnerability. And I just want to close with reading this one story that Jack Marin put in. That's an interview with one of the people who he talked to. And here it goes. And she says, like most people who've been married 19 years, Ted and I have a lot of routines, including making love on Saturday mornings before starting our chores. Which is so funny. It's almost like sex is a chore that they do on Saturday mornings before they do the rest of it. Right? This tends to be rather mechanical and obligatory. One Saturday, I think it was about 3 or 4 years ago, I woke up late and Ted was already out in the garden. I opened the drapes to a glorious morning. There was Ted in his overalls, digging in the dirt, singing. Instead of feeling hurt that he was ignoring me, I thought how cute he looked and how happy I felt. Even then, that was pretty rare because I was often pissed off with Ted for not showing me enough affection. It's so silly what happened over the next few hours. Promise me you won't laugh. But we were both so different. I joined him in the yard and we instantly began flirting. He made sexy comments under his breath. I remember one. He said, "I'd like to rub my face in that bush over there," motioning towards me. I tried a few jokes myself. Stuff like, "Is that a shovel in your pocket, or are you just happy to see me?" He made me feel so free and sexy that I unbuttoned my shirt. When he saw my breasts, he instantly dropped what he was doing and began licking my nipples, smearing dirt all over me. I can't explain why this didn't bother me, because normally I'm such a clean freak. I want everything so clean. But before long, we were both stark naked, fighting over who would pull out each weed, sometimes rolling on top of each other, laughing our heads off, being totally outrageous. The sun was hot, so I grabbed the hose and sprayed him down. Soon we were both drenched and making love on the lawn. The most exciting part was when Ted gazed into my eyes and said with so much feeling, "I love you more than anyone in the whole world." I have no idea what got into him, but I sure wish Ted would be like that more often. And what about you? I asked. What if you were like that more often? She didn't care for this question one bit, and she wiped the radiant smile off her face and stuffed her joyous tail back inside. She remained mostly silent for the end of the session. So I think that question, what about you? What if you were like that more often? Really touches me.